Okay, we're going to study now the Chot Shabbat, Perek Yod Gimel, Halacha um, Tetvav. I'm sorry, Tet Zayin. The law we're going to study today is a bit nuanced, subtle, and it requires some understanding. So I will try to give the proper background so that you understand the law. Let's start by reading the law. Hazorek Meshut Yachid L'Rshut Yachid U'Rshut Rabim Ba'emsa. A person throws from one Reshut Yachid, like from his house, from the window of his house, across Reshut Rabim. For example, there's a street. The street is Reshut Rabim, and it enters the window of his friend's house across the street. So if it's from Reshut Yachid to Reshut Yachid, through the airspace of Reshut Rabim, in that case, he's patur. Because although there was akira in Reshut Yachid, in order for him to have been chayav, there should have been hannaha in Reshut Harabim. But there was no hannaha in Reshut Harabim. The ball was in a continual state of motion. And therefore there was no hannaha. That's why he's patur. Patur aval asur. This law is an absolute law, provided that it was above 3 tefachim, meaning it was further, it was the space between where the object was moving and measuring down to the ground was greater than 1 foot, greater than 3 tefachim. In that case, since it never came to a resting state, he's patur. But if the object is traveling within 3 tefachim of the ground, for example, there's a basement window, there's a street, and then across the street there's another house with a basement window, and he throws the ball through his basement window and it goes within 3 tefachim, within 1 foot of the ground, and it enters the basement window on the other side. Let me explain this law. And the object he throws lands on something. It lands on something. There was hanacha. And therefore, he's chayav. You would say, well, okay, well, obviously he's chayav. There was hanacha on the Reshut Rabim. Wait. It didn't land on the Reshut Rabim. It landed on something that was on the Reshut Rabim. This is a very important point. If it lands on the ground of the Reshut Rabim, obviously that's hanacha. There's no question. Here it didn't land on the ground of the Reshut Rabim. It landed upon an object or some sort of protrusion that itself was situated on the Reshut Rabim. Now, the point is that when you have an object on the Reshut Harabim, that object is considered to be its own space. I'll give you an example. I once heard I heard a knowledgeable Talmid Chacham, no question. I'm not going to mention his name because I'm going to be criticizing him now, and I don't believe in unfairly criticizing people because, they don't have a chance to answer. So it wouldn't be fair if I mentioned his name, and maybe he'll say, no, you misunderstood me. But I will, big Talmid Chacham, or very well-known Talmid Chacham from Eretz Yisrael. One of the sons of Arav Odeh Yosef, big Talmid Chacham, certainly knows halacha. And knows it well. So he said there was a question regarding if a person is wearing a plastic raincoat, a disposable plastic raincoat on Shabbat. So the disposable plastic raincoat is there to protect you from the rain, and therefore you may wear it if it's raining on Shabbat, and it's not considered carrying in the Reshut Rabim. It's not really clothing, right? Nobody wears this plastic garment on top of himself. But since it's raining, it's protected and it's allowed. But if it stops raining, then you can't wear it. Let's say it's sunny outside. It's not there to protect you anymore. And it's certainly not peeling. It's not decorative. It's a piece of plastic. So he says, take it and throw it into a garbage pail, meaning you're in the Shut Rabim, it stops raining, the sun came out, you don't need the protection of the raincoat anymore. It's again, we're dealing with a disposable, those pieces of plastics. People sometimes put like garbage bags on top of themselves, whatever. You won't see any modeling shoots with models wearing pieces of garbage bags on top of themselves. So it's not considered an appealing thing. It's not decorative. So what do you do in that case? He says, throw it into a garbage pail. You're in the Shut Rabim. Throw the coat into the garbage pail because you can't wear it anymore. It's tiltul. So I disagree. You can't throw it into the garbage pail because the garbage pail is situated in the Shut Rabim. You say, okay, so it's no problem. So I'm throwing it. It's like I'm throwing it in the Shut Rabim. I'm in the Shut Rabim. I'm throwing the coat into the Shut Rabim. That's allowed. No, because while the garbage pail is situated in the Reshut Rabim, it is itself not Reshut Rabim. It has its own dimensions. So most garbage pails are more than 4 tefachim wide, right? Greater than 4 tefachim wide, and more than 10 tefachim high, more than 40 inches high. And therefore, the garbage pail itself is considered Reshut HaYachid. Now, if you're standing in Reshut Rabim and you throw the plastic coat into the garbage pail, you're doing tutul from Reshut Rabim, and Hanachai Reshut HaYachid, that's Asur. So why am I saying this? I want you to understand the law that we're reading now. Normally, when you throw an object that you are carrying, you put it on top of something that is on the Reshut Rabim. That's not considered Reshut Rabim. You have to look at the measure of the protrusion or the thing that you're throwing it into. So, for example, again, let's say I have a garbage pail. Let's say let's say a car. I want to put something on top of the car. The car has the measures of Reshut Yahid. It's 4 tefachim wide by 4 tefachim long, at least as a minimum, and it's more than 10 tefachim high. So again, I can't do that. Okay, let's say there's a long pole in Reshut Rabim. That long pole, somebody took a spear and speared it into the ground. That pole, it's less than 4 tefachim wide. Obviously, it's a pole. That's called mikom petur. And therefore, I am allowed to put something on top of that pole because if I'm standing in a Reshut Rabim and I want to put something on top of that pole, I can because that pole is not a Reshut Yachid. It has the status of mikom petur, right? Or let's say I have a short pole, similar thing, but it's a little shorter. It's like 4 tefachim high. The pole is 4 tefachim high, or it's like a square, rod. I'm not sure what you feel, a vertical plank, right? Piece of wood, let's say, and it's stuck into the ground. And this is less than 4 tefachim by 4 tefachim, and it's stuck into the ground. I put something on top of that plank. Again, it's patur because the plank itself has its law of mekom petur. Now we can understand the law that Harambam is saying. You took this ball, you threw it. Normally, if it came to a rest upon one of these objects that I described, that you were in the Reshut Yachid, let's say. Now you want to throw it into the house of the Reshut, of that window of the Reshut Yachid across the street. You're in the basement, You want to throw it through the basement window, and the ball is going to travel within 3 tefachim of the ground. That's case one. Case number two, you're in a regular window, and you want to throw it into a regular window across the street. Case two, the ball is going to be traveling above 3 tefachim. Let's deal with case two first. Let's say I took the ball, I threw it, and my intention was that it goes into the window across the street, and it's, again, greater than 1 foot above the ground. And as it's traveling, it comes to a rest upon one of these poles. We said that when it comes to a rest upon that pole is considered mekom pitur, and therefore you're patur. And even if after the ball came to a rest, let's say it bounced, delayed reaction, and then it, continued onwards into the window across the street. So in this case, you would be still patur, because even though it came to a rest upon the pole, but the pole was greater than 1 foot in height. And therefore, when the ball came to a resting position, it was considered that it's resting upon the pole, which is mekom petur, and not upon the ground of reshut harabim. But here's the point. If the pole is less than 1 foot in height, and the ball rests upon that pole, that's considered like it's resting on the Reshut Harabim, because it's within a foot of Reshut Harabim. When something comes to a resting position, and it's within 1 foot of Reshut Harabim, it's considered like it's resting on Reshut Harabim. So now going to case one. Person throws the ball from his basement window. It travels, and he wants it to go to the basement window on the other side of the street, from Reshut Yachid to Reshut Yachid. But then the ball, let's say it's a ball, right, a bouncy object, it comes to a momentary rest upon a pole, but it's a short pole. The pole is more like a stunt. And that pole is within, or a stump, I'm sorry. It comes to a rest upon that stump. You would say, but hold on, the stump is less than 4 tefachim by 4 tefachim. It's a mekom petur. Or even if it's greater than 4 tefachim by 4 tefachim, let's say it's 10 tefach, it's a stump, a tree stump. But it's not a Reshut Yachid because, again, the Reshut Yachid has to be at least 10 tefachim high. So it's a karmelit. So we say it rested upon karmelit. Nothing wrong with that. It didn't rest upon the Reshut Harabim. No, because the height of the stump was less than a foot. It was a foot or less. Since it was a foot or less, when it came to a rest upon the stump, it's considered like it rested on the Reshut Harabim. And even if later on it rolls forward or it somehow bounces forward, it continues to Reshut Yachid. In this case, he's Hayab, because in between the Reshut Yachid on one side and the Reshut Yachid on the other side, it rested on the street stump, and the stump was within a foot of the ground. And since the stump was within a foot of the ground, it was considered like it was resting on the ground, which is a Reshut Harabim. But if the tree stump was greater in height than 1 foot, and it rested upon the stump, in that case, it would not be considered to have been resting on the Reshut Harabim. We would take the measure of the stump, greater than 4 tefachim, less than 4 tefachim. Is it greater than 10 tefachim in height, less than 10 tefachim in height? That's the point. It's a very subtle point, but it's worth understanding. Analogously, there was a law we studied in the same chapter where a person was holding an object in his hand. He's in the house, let's say, and he stretches his hand outside the window. He did the Akira and the Reshut Yachid, and now his hand is outside the window. And somebody takes from his hand the object. So we said normally the person who did the akira in a shute yachid and then stuck his hand outside the window, that's not considered hanacha. And he's patur because he never did hanacha. But then we also said, and this is in Perek Gimel Halacha Vav, that if when you stuck your hand outside the window, you were within 3 tefachim of the ground, 3 tefachim or less, 1 foot or less, right? That's considered that you did hanacha in the Reshut Rabim itself. And in that case, you are hayav, because the hanacha in your hand, which is a foot or less within a foot of the ground, is considered hanacha on the ground itself. But if, on the other hand, you stuck your hand and it was greater than 1 foot high, and it's like that in the air, even though you're in the air of Reshut Rabim, that air is the air of Reshut Rabim. But since it's in your hand, it's not considered like it's resting in Reshut Rabim. It's a great law, very precise law, very well worth spending the time and effort to understand this. Let me see if I finish the halacha. Tetzayin. Right. We said, again, this ball that you threw from your basement window, it landed on something which was within a foot of the ground. Even though later on the ball bounced forward or rolled forward and somehow entered the window of the house on the other side. This is considered as if although it was resting in Reshut Rabim, and he is therefore Hayav. So when something is within 3 tefachim of the ground of Reshut Rabim, it's considered like it's resting on the ground of Reshut Rabim on condition that it's not. That it's actually resting, meaning it doesn't even have to be a complete resting situation. This is a big chidush. Normally, hanacha means a permanent situation of stability. There's another subtle chidush here. I'm not sure if you caught it. The first chidush is that if something is within 3 tefachim of the ground of Reshut Rabim, it's considered like it's on Reshut Rabim. And we no longer just look at the specific measurement of the protrusion that it's on. But the second chidush is the hanacha, for purposes of hanacha and Reshut Rabim, doesn't have to be a permanent resting position. Right? When something is in the hand, within 3 tefachim of the ground, the hand is not a permanent situation. He's going to have to bring it back in eventually. You can't hold an object like that forever. Right? So it's not considered hanacha. But if it's within 3 tefachim, since it's so close to the ground, it's considered hanacha. Similarly, let's say this ball came to kind of a resting or semi-resting position on the tree stump in the Reshut Rabim within 3 tefachim of the ground, that's considered hanacha. לכן הזורק מרשות הרבים לרשות הרבים ורשות היחיד באמצע פטור. Let's do this tomorrow.